All right, so again, it's actually going to be a somewhat similar kind of discussion as to the first speaker there, John. Somewhat, I guess, a little bit of a different approach, but very, very, very similar. So, Athenahealt, where I work, when I joined the company, they had been going through a bit of a change and kind of moved towards a service-driven model for delivering things throughout the company. And the team that I belong to sort of fell under this infrastructure as a service type of model. And one of the big things that we were tasked with doing is really sort of maturing that configuration management space and sort of compliance settings, not so much compliance. We have a compliance team, but ensuring those settings are in place through the configuration management. All right. So why did we move to this? Well, one of the things was security was one of the big drivers for and they were really looking to have us move towards a format that was more consistently applied. We had compliance settings policy, but we had them in multiple domains, and then what happened with systems that were out of the domain. So they wanted something that applied universally, whether you're in the domain or outside the domain. Our purview and most of what we managed was Windows-based. And they were looking as a company to sort of move towards something that's, supporting infrastructure as a code. Wanted to get away from sort of GUI-driven management manually, doing these things and putting them into code bases where you could get, a CI/CD pipeline in place and apply these changes quickly and evenly across. And then we absolutely needed to sort of improve our monitoring and alerting, because one of the things that we had experience with group policy, and myself, I've worked with group policy, good Lord, for the 19 or so years that it's existed as, in the Windows 2000 space, and even before when it was the, Windows NT policy format. And it's great at applying a lot of settings, but sort of figuring out what's being applied down to one space and the active sort of monitoring of a particular setting and or configurations applying to systems out of the box, it really doesn't do a great job of that, nor is Microsoft really trying to look to do that as much as they are saying, hey, here's this option if you want to expand on it, or, other vendors in the market can see a need and create something for it. But for us, we found that this was really kind of producing a number of problems. We weren't 100% sure that our configurations were in fact applying, and we weren't always aware when there was an issue. So we looked at, moving away from group policy settings, at least for our baseline security configurations for our NIST hardening and so forth. So we took a look at the group policies just real quickly. Maybe something that people are familiar with or not familiar with, but the idea of a group policy, you'll hear this all the time, group policy objects. That's just a unique instance in the Active Directory database that references a group policy template that's applied. And that object can be linked to different places in the Active Directory database to apply to it. The group policy template is the actual folder structure that contains the actual settings in the files and so forth. So for us, for the purpose of migrating, we were looking at, okay, well, we need to pay attention to these, at least in the sense that GPO is going to link, or the links are going to determine where we go ahead and apply these into what systems. The GPT defines what settings are in the profile. Now, again, we looked at, different types of products and ways to do this, and we kind of had a similar journey as John as well, in that our organization had Puppet in place, and as we moved to the service model, our teams, our core team that manages a lot of the Linux stuff, was already sort of using this, and so it kind of made sense for us. We looked at DSC, we looked at Azure Operations Manager and things like that, and we kind of determined, geez, we already have Puppet. It looks like it's going to do a lot of the things that we wanted to do as our sort of bullet points. And we have an idea of how to sort of break this down and start moving it over. So in group policy, real quickly, nobody really cares too much about this, or if they do, they've probably looked at it online. But The registry.pol file, and I believe John spoke about it a bit as well, about having to sort of convert that into a more readable format. So under whatever group policy template, it's going to be under a GUID, under your sysvol folder. That's actually going to be, and that's sometimes the difficulty when people start first looking at it, is, all right, well, where do I find that policy? I have a friendly name here, and then I have the GUID. And, you can go through the group policy management console and look at the details there and find out what that GUID is. And then underneath that is going to be the policy settings. That's going to be the group policy template by that long GUID name. Now, as far as registry.pol, it's kind of encoded in older format. This is really for them to provide some sort of legacy backwards compatibility. And, they've kept it in place as part of it. It's really the only one of all of these files that is not easily humanly readable without some level of conversion from its encoding. There are tools, and I put this one up as one example of a freeware tool that's out there, this registry.pol viewer utility, which will, display it on the screen as, readable. And then you can export it to a spreadsheet or, a CSV. And it's a useful tool if you want to get some look at what's going on and what the actual settings are compared to what's in the group policy management, where you have a friendly description. The GPT, so the registry.pol file is going to contain your non-labeled security or non-security labeled settings. The GPT npl.inf, which I can never say, contains what are considered security-related settings. Now, for our purposes, we were first looking at the registry piece. There's a lot more that's in that file, and I give some examples here: the service log configuration. It can have, service startup and things like that. Those are all things that are in this INF file, which is easily readable and digestible and normalized. Then they have the preferences, which is Microsoft's ability or Microsoft's desire to sort of create a way to make those settings potentially optional or configurable, meaning that, hey, we're going to look and we're going to go to this machine and apply that setting, but if somebody undoes it, we'll leave it there, or we'll enforce it the next time we apply. Those XML files can have drives, shortcuts, all kinds of things. We were really looking at just the registry settings to start out. And I keep mentioning this because at the end of this, I'm going to talk about a module that we used and that I've made publicly available that people can look at to do conversions of the registry and auditing settings for a group policy. And the last one is the audit.csv. And this one's, again, very simple, readable. The only one is not that isn't is the registry.pol. The audit.csv is going to have all your advanced audit settings that are applied by that policy. So these are the pieces that we looked at. Okay, we know these components. Now, how do we get this into something that's going to be useful for Puppet? So as I mentioned, our key goal was the security piece first. We had, NIST settings that we wanted to apply across our entire environment when there was a Windows machine, whether they were in the domain, which didn't matter which domain, or if they were in a work group. And with Puppet, that allowed us to do that in one unified file or manifest, one PP file, or a couple if you wanted to do roles or whatever. But it allowed us to go ahead and centralize that and not have to copy it. We've ran into situations too where in the different domains, we had a scenario where one setting might have been missed or wasn't correctly configured and so forth. Now there's one source of truth, which for us, especially under source control and things like that, was really desirable. We wanted to phase these settings into Puppet so that if we ran into an issue, we could always quickly go back. And eventually, we really hope to be able to open up some of that when it applies and is appropriate to different teams that manage different applications in our company that may need to apply settings that don't necessarily need blanket coverage to a group policy or rights to that, so that they could potentially change things that they shouldn't be changing. So we reviewed the tools and projects that were out there, and we really felt that for us, it would be best to sort of write our own code to do this conversion. That's what we ended up doing. So with WinPuppet tools, that's what the name I gave the module. It's a subset of something that we use internally. We've created a lot of our own automation for management and things like we've had scenarios with Azure and things like that where machines get, or stacks get rebuilt and, same name base and everything else. Well, they don't have the agent on them. And now all of a sudden there's a certificate registered and, that doesn't match up and all of a sudden Puppet isn't applying. So we have some automation that runs periodically, looks for that. And, if we find a scenario like that, we have it automatically kick off and clean up the cert and, back up the old one and then have it reapply. What this particular module is a subset of all of those tools. This one is particularly focused on just converting group policy objects into a usable manifest with the registry and audit settings in place. So the code is public. Yep.
Could I ask you to move your microphone just a little bit closer? It's cutting out a little bit every now and then.
All right. Is that any better?
That sounds better now. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. So the code is publicly available on GitHub, and I have the link up there. Again, it's for right now registry settings and audit settings. It can easily be expanded. It's a work in progress, and as we get more time towards it and the team starts to work towards expanding some of that, we'll certainly update the code and make it available. And, certainly people are welcome to sort of, contribute or comment and those types of things. It is usable in its state alone. It's just one function that does conversion. So it's built on code. I just wanted to call out to, don't like to take credit for something I didn't necessarily do, but part of the code that's in there is openly sourced and licensed code for GP registry policy. And I forget the gentleman's name, but you can find that out on the PowerShell, gallery. He did a great job of writing some tool sets or some functions to go through and convert the policy stuff, the poll.edit, into a readable format. So I figured why reinvent the wheel there and incorporated that in. So as far as this Puppet tool requirement, as I said, it only has one public function right now, Convert-Gpo to PuppetManifest. It takes registry settings and auditing settings if you tell it to include the audit settings from a group policy and converts it to a usable manifest. It does require PowerShell 5. I use classes in there. The outputted manifest will require registry and audit poll modules be implemented in your environment because I do go through and actually set it up as a registry value, registry key, and use audit poll and registry to apply those. And for our particular purposes, we kind of felt that was our best option because we were providing our group policy piece as an evidence component for some of our audits. And we wanted something that we could easily say, here is what applies to, Windows 2016 servers, Windows 2019 servers, whatever it is. And we had a range of 2008 R2 all the way up to 2019. Thankfully, we're almost out of the 2008 market. So just a quick overview of what the tool does and that process. So similar to what John's team was mentioning, we go through and we process the ADMX and ADML files. Now, in this particular case, it does it every time you run the module. Wherever you point it, and you have a lot of them like we do, these ADMX or, administrative templates with all the, registry settings or configuration settings, and these ADML files that are the language files with the descriptions, we link this up and normalize the data so that we get settings and a description that we can put in to our out, or use to output. So we normalize that. We then read in policy definition spreadsheet. This is one of those things too that it could easily be taken out of the code. I ran into scenarios, and I didn't bother to really research why, where there was sort of the 3 to 5% of what was exported didn't have a description. So for our purposes, I wanted to be able to have that. So I included this definition spreadsheet. And this is something that you just get on out on the web from Microsoft. I believe the last time it was updated was like 2018 or something, or what. It's been a little while, and maybe it's been updated by then. I haven't looked. We haven't had a need, but that file just is a CSV file with settings and description right in the CSV file. So we create that master list of settings and descriptions and then normalize that. Again, then we go and find and read through the policy, the poll file that exists there, and any XML registry files, and add that to a normalized array for the registry settings. Process the GPT, mpl.inf, and pull the registry settings out of that. Then we go ahead and create a manifest that's normalized settings into Puppet, and it'll create all the registry key or value settings that should be applied through Puppet. And then if you've passed the switch or the switches that are required, it'll also process and convert the audit policy settings. Then it'll close up the file, and you're left with a usable manifest that you can apply. So real quickly, the parameters, you don't necessarily need to go through each of these. They are commented, in the help for the function and so forth. But basically, a GPO folder path, I put this there so that you can point to the sysvol, or you could point to something local on your laptop, however you want to apply it. Or if you wanted to use this in some level of an automation or whatever, put a folder and somebody drops a GPO in there at a particular time, it kicks off and grabs whatever. But then the policy definition repository, again, you can copy this by default. All these GPO folder paths, you can go to whatever your domain name is, and you can go to sysvol, again, domain policies. In that folder is a policy definitions folder. That's where you're going to see, all your ADM, ADML, ADMX files and so forth. Then you can give it a profile name. This is really going to be, your folder where this is going to be dropped. And this is going to drop to wherever the script is run by default. So whatever you give that folder name, it's going to create a folder in there, or that profile name, it's going to create a folder by that name wherever the script is running, so whatever the location of the script is. Policy path definition, policy definition, so policy path definition, as I was talking about, that's just the spreadsheet from Microsoft. And then, all that's required. As I said, you can take this code and do what you want with it if you want to change the way that it works. I just wanted to be able to sort of provide people with an example of what we did, and if it was usable, put it out there in the community. You can include audit settings. It's just a switch, and once you do that, it'll ask for a path to where the audit file is, that audit.csv file. You can again, point that to a different location, or, point it to the folder that contains the policy itself, however you wanted to apply that. I just left it as open-ended so that if you wanted to take another audit CSV file and say, hey, I want to apply this policy and add these audit settings, you had the ability to do so. So very quickly, again, I realize we're behind time, so I'm trying to not take up too much. Here you can see, you just import the module, WinPuppet tools.psd. Then you have the Convert-Gpo to PuppetManifest. There are the settings I was talking about and some examples of it. Again, you can set variables. You can splat this so that you were, passing a splat with all this information as well. However you wanted to do that. So go through. Just wanted to give you some screenshots on it, and the only reason I'm doing that is because the size that we took, and of course that was just hindsight. The one I grabbed, with our ADMX and ADMLs, it can take anywhere from 10 to 50 minutes to process. Obviously we could do more to optimize that, but when we wrote it, we're like, okay, look, we're not using it all this often, and basically rush to do this immediately and or real time. This is sort of a one-time conversion. So this time frame was fine for us. Obviously, you can look at, where there might be some, where object clauses or something. You could do for eaches, or you could find other ways to speed up that process that don't have as much overhead and perform quicker. But it'll go through and enumerate these. Then once it's done, it spits out, hey, we found this. A couple of different, I try to dump everything out to a log as well, so that if you're looking for a specific set of, okay, what was applied into this manifest, you can look at each of the chunks. And then at the end of it, the second to last line, you'll see that it points where the default.pp. So it's going to create the manifest is going to be called default.pp. Obviously, you can then rename it or do whatever you want to do, especially if this is one component in a set of roles, if you do that sort of role profile format, and those settings could be one of those that you apply, or that can apply to all systems or whatever. All right. So the end result is, something that's commented out. It creates this default.pp, and that file then is set up with whatever the appropriate registry keys and values that should be applied. Matter of fact, here, let me look. And this is one I ran earlier. And as you see, it has all the different settings, registry keys, everything else. And I believe I ran the audit policy piece. Perhaps I did not. And of course I did not. Oh, that's right, too. I'll put it in another location. That's why. No, apparently I didn't. All right, I thought I ran that one with the audit policy settings too, but if I had run it, like I said, these switches are optional. If I had run it with the audit policy piece, you would see audit poll tags in here to apply the audit settings. All right, but as I said, that's the tool that we came up with and are sort of moving forward with. We've really just started to move towards, converting over these security settings. We do have, about almost 2,000 machines now, all sort of applying these settings and having a base configuration that is consistent across. We've started to expand that now more into, software compliance as far as managing versions and things like that with Chocolatey through Puppet. But it's been a great experience. But this particular tool, as I said, if you find it useful, please feel free to take it, do what you want with it. And, if you have comments or feedbacks, that's great as well. We'll take a look, and as time permits, we'll sort of look to expand that. And that's it. I was able to get done much faster than my first attempted runs for this. So if there are any questions.
That was great. There was actually a lot of side conversations about kind of the collaboration when we get all these brilliant Windows minds going. And as you were talking, it kind of made me think about a different project that we've got going internally at Puppet. I don't know if you've used the DSC module very much, but that originally it was like this mega super meta module that included like every DSC thing under the sun and was very large, and it took a very long time to plug in sync, et cetera, et cetera. The Windows team is actually right now working on and then they moved and they did a DSC Lite. It was the same model, but they stripped out all the resources. The Windows team is now moving to an entirely different model, which sounds a lot like what you're doing. they've got this builder that that's written completely in PowerShell. You just point it at a PowerShell DSC resource, and it builds a module for you. So it builds a module, it embeds the resource and everything. So you get a self-contained standalone module that is just that PowerShell module. And I'm wondering, it sounds like your tool does very, very similar things. And I'm wondering if you might want to kind of collaborate, work together a little bit, because this sounds like it could be incredibly useful in that same line.
Yeah, no, and the thing is anywhere, as I say, as that community starts to build and there's more on that Windows base of things, especially, we have a lot of stuff that we've used with DSC as well. And yeah, we'd be very interested in.
That's really cool. They're running a beta test right now. It's the builder actually exists and it actually builds code and it works right now. So right now what they're doing is kind of testing it and running it on a broad spectrum of different things and in different like edge cases to kind of kick the tires a little bit. I will connect you with them and you can just chat with them and figure out how it makes sense to work together.
Beautiful.
I do have one question from someone named Yong who wants to know kind of your perspective of how you might compare PowerShell, DSC, and Puppet, how they might like work together or how they might like do different parts of tasks. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. As of right now, we use Puppet in our environment, and we do have DSC. We use DSC Lite now. We were using DSC. And we do have different sort of Windows settings and things like that where it's easier for us to take things that we've already written that are in DSC and have Puppet apply those and, use and pull in whatever required, DSC resources and things like that and, apply like, networking settings and things of that nature. So, I mean, I think they work very well together, and that was one of the appeals for us, too, especially considering that we have a sort of an Azure footprint as well for a lot of our stuff. There was a lot of Azure work done that, where we can take that and convert that to, from DSC, use that DSC Lite module in Puppet to apply that stuff. So I think they work very well together.